Hi, this is Gemma, and this is Gemma Reads Her Writing. I'm going to read a short story. It's called Something in the Air. My writing name is Gemma Conway. This has previously been published in Social Alternative magazine, September 88. Japan had much more pollution than they could ever put to use, so they decided to export some. They packaged their product in big balloons and, being too honest to try to pass it off as insecticide or theatrical fog, they called it horrible black smoke. Australian politicians saw money-making potential in it. Australia, declared the PM, if it is to keep up with the rest of the world, must also begin exporting HBS. He ordered suction units to be placed in the cities to suck up the HBS, and it wasn't long before the people noticed that the air smelled differently. Some especially health-minded citizens, recognising that this was because it was clean, leapt joyfully about the city, relishing the opportunity to breathe as deeply as they pleased. Once all the HBS had been sucked in, the PM ordered that special HBS factories be built to cope with the imminent demand. People heard about these plans. Exactly what do the letters HBS stand for? They wanted to know. The government tried to be secretive. We prefer not to start any riots, a representative claimed. However, after a moment or two, the information had been leaked, and 5,070 journalists had discovered that HBS stood for horrible black smoke, and that scientists had almost invented a way of using it as an energy source for motorised fountain pens. When the people read about this the next day, their reactions were various. Some were horrified. I don't know, these cried. The way this world's going. Several people decided that it would be all right if they didn't think about it, while others went to the trouble of crowding around the PM, yelling nasty things at him, and even persuading his security men to jostle him. Immediately a group formed. They gathered together in the evenings and worried and talked. Finally, some of them set off to see the PM and ask him some embarrassing questions. The PM welcomed them. He loved to meet the ordinary people and discuss their problems with them. Not only does HBS smell bad, said the group's leader, Percy Greenshanks, a thin, sad-faced man, but there are scientists who, even though they work for the government, have admitted to a sort of intuitive feeling that it is also harmful. If HBS factories are placed near the cities, therefore, the health of city dwellers could be seriously jeopardised, and if the factories are placed in the country, where will the city people go for their annual breathe? The PM replied, obviously the HBS is not going into the air, only into storage balloons. The askers of embarrassing questions huddled together for a moment. He inquired, how are you going to ensure that the HBS won't get out of these balloons? I assure you that stringent safety precautions will be taken. What will these be? Well, the balloons will, of course, be made of much stronger stuff than party balloons, so that they will never ever burst unless you stick pins in them. Here the PM chuckled amiably. And who, apart from naughty little boys, would do a thing like that? I will, of course, as an added precaution, appeal to the nation's naughty little boys to not stick pins in the balloons. The AEQ stood with their mouths open for a moment, and then Percy said, come on, stop joking and tell us what are the real stringent safety precautions. The PM, lowering his eyebrows and using some irrelevant adjectives, declared, HBS is a reality whether you like it or not. The AEQ persisted. What will be the byproduct from using HBS in motorised fountain pens? The PM made the special scoffing noise which had won him many an argument, and said the by-product will be horrible black sludge which can possibly be utilised as ink. He then refused to discuss anything except the upcoming 150th birthday celebrations of English gardening in Australia. Throughout the nation, HBS factories slowly grew from the ground up and then were quickly pulled down again when, after some rain, the builders realised that the AEQ had penetrated the building sites and replaced the bricks they were using with cleverly disguised blocks of icing sugar. Eventually, however, the factories, which consisted mainly of chimneys, were completed and workers were hired. The AEQ, with the cooperation of an anonymous government representative, exchanged a large quantity of money for plans of the factory sites and held nationwide meetings to discuss their next tactics. Meanwhile, production commenced in the factories. HBS was manufactured underneath the chimneys and then pumped into balloons placed over the tops of them. Inside the chimneys were valves, and the workers who controlled these were given strict instructions to make damn sure they never, under any circumstances, forgot to close the valves before the inflated balloons were sealed off and removed. Otherwise, HBS would pour into the air and threaten the lives of the people living in nearby housing estates. Consequently, the escape of HBS was only an occasional occurrence. The AEQ, having decided on a plan of action, infiltrated the factory sites. They crept about unnoticed by the workers and placed large quantities of light bulbs on deflated balloons which had just been attached to the chimneys. When the balloons were inflated into huge spheres, the light bulbs were projected into the air and then they fell to the ground, exploding loudly. The workers were all greatly alarmed and immediately went on strike for danger money. By this time, the politicians were feeling pretty foolish as there were no forthcoming buyers for either Australia's or Japan's HBS. The PM began to bother his wife by talking in his sleep. He was greatly relieved when Australian and overseas pop groups began to buy HBS for use in stage effects. He was then able to meet the factory workers' wage demands, and soon the factories were doing a roaring business. When these pop groups and their fans had all died from asphyxiation, however, the demand ceased. The PM began talking in his sleep again, and after he'd seen a financial report on the HBS industry, it was not long before his wife had moved into the spare wing. After much careful consideration and discussion via his bathroom mirror, the PM made a public announcement. My government is opposed to the production of air pollution, and all HBS factories will be shut down. Some of the members of his party were very pleased with this statement, while others did a bit of jumping up and down. How dare you make such a statement without consulting us? Cried one. You must have gone insane, cried another. Now listen, mate, said yet another, putting his arm around the PM's shoulder. We all realise that breathing is an important political issue, but sometimes sacrifices have to be made so the country can keep its head above water. It took them a few minutes, but this latter group managed to talk the PM round to their way of thinking. He made a further public announcement. Although I was telling the truth when I said that my government is opposed to the production of air pollution, this does not necessarily mean it can do anything to prevent it. Australian industry must progress if Australians are to avoid starvation, and I am not about to neglect my responsibilities in this regard, just to please an ignorant and loud minority group. I am sorry if I have confused anybody lately, but you all must understand that it's hard to think straight when you're in government. He went home to his wife that night, and she sat beside him and comforted him. "Been a difficult day, hasn't it?" she said. The PM put his head on her shoulder and stared at a distant wall. The deep crease over his nose broadened, and his eyebrows lost a little weight. "What are you thinking?" asked his wife. "I was just wondering," he replied, "about selling large balloons of eucalyptus-scented fresh air to the Japanese." The end. Bye for now.